Good morning and welcome back to day 2 of the Parents and Caregivers as Partners Conference. My name is Zena Sherrick and I'm a member of the Mental Health and Wellbeing Committee.
And I am Kayla Rudberg-Rotman. I am also a member of the Mental Health and Wellbeing Committee. We'd like to start today with an opening, so please help me welcome Ignatius Student Trustee Isaiah Shefkat.
Thank you, Kayla. Good morning. I acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. I acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. I acknowledge from the Great Lakes to Quebec is the dish with one spoon wampum. The dish with one spoon wampum is between the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share this land and protect the territory. We all eat out of one dish, all of us that share this territory, with only one spoon. I recognize the enduring presence of all First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples on Turtle Island, and I acknowledge the children and families affected by the Indian residential school system. I also recognize the elders and youth that use their voice to make change, and I'd like to thank Mother Earth for all that she does to sustain us with the air we breathe, water we drink, and land we live on. Chimigwech. My name is Isaiah Shafkat. I'm the Indigenous Student Trustee for the Toronto District School Board. I'm Two-Spirit Mi'kmaq and Loon Clan from the Mi'kmaq First Nation Reserve in Newfoundland. Thank you.
Thank you, Indigenous Student Trustee Shafkat, for your welcome and introduction. I hope that you all had a wonderful day of learning yesterday and that you had some great takeaways from either your workshops or our keynote speaker, Dr. James McCokas, or conversations with other parents or staff. One of my takeaways yesterday was being part of the continuing conversations and being reminded always of the importance of partnership and engagement of parents with the whole school community. My apologies, parents and caregivers with the whole school community, from mental health and well-being to school councils. It definitely takes a village.
That's so interesting to hear, Zena. I had a few aha moments in my sessions yesterday too. And it's so nice when you feel that light bulb moment happen and know it's something that is going to change your life or your child's life for the better. I hope that you had similar moments yesterday. I heard there was a lot of great discussion inside the workshops and micro sessions, and it is so nice to connect with people again and to hear from others and participate. I, for one, had been missing that during the pandemic, but I am so grateful for the staff and volunteers and experts who helped bring this remarkable weekend together. Connection is so important, and I appreciate that time we get to spend together. We also want to ensure that those parents who weren't able to join us yesterday or today can still benefit from the conversation and hear your aha moments, of which I'm sure there will be many. Please tweet out some of your take homes with the hashtag TDSB Parent Conf. I'm now pleased to welcome Trustee Christopher Mamolti, the Vice Chair of the Board, to say a few words. Trustee Mamolati.
Thank you very much, Kayla. Very much appreciated. First of all, good morning to everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the 2021 Parents and Caregivers as Partners virtual conference. My name is Christopher Mamoliti, and I'm the trustee for Ward 4, Humber River Black Creek, and the Vice Chair of the Toronto District School Board. Thank you to the Parent and Community Engagement Office for planning this engaging community event and for having me here with you today. It's an honor to be a part of a critical conversation such as anti-oppression, anti-racism, inclusion, mental health and well-being, and parent-caregiver engagement. As you know, this last year has been incredibly challenging for our school communities and society as a whole. Along with the physical impacts of COVID-19, this pandemic has taken a toll on the mental health and well-being of so many, including our most vulnerable in society already facing incredible challenges. Student mental health and well-being has always been an important part of student success, but now more than ever is a focused priority at the TDSB, especially as staff help students adjust to their new learning environments in this ever-changing new normal. With in-person learning largely returned this school year, I should say, it will take time and a collaborative effort to address the growing social and emotional needs of students on top of continuing to provide the ongoing support to those already in need. I do want to be clear though, we have some of the most dedicated and incredible staff within our team, and I know that we'll be here to help our students through these challenging times. It's also critical that you play a critical role in our youth education, whether it's helping with homework or just making sure they know you're there to talk and listen when they're in need. Although health and safety of our students and stakeholders remain a top priority, we're also committed to ensuring that all students have equitable access to the programs and supports they need to succeed, from professional development training to staff to introducing new ways of learning and creating more inclusive learning environments. We want to ensure that students feel supported during this transition and that they feel safe and accepted. As the most diverse school board in Canada, it's crucial that our programs and support reflect the beautiful diversity of our communities. As always, the healthiest way is working together to ensure our students are healthy and safe and be able to learn at the TDSB. We do hope that you find today's sessions informative and engaging. Please don't be afraid to ask questions and share your perspectives. This is your opportunity to learn, and it's also an opportunity for us at the TDSB to hear many voices of parents and caregivers in our system. Once again, I want to thank everyone who helped organize this really important engagement event. And we thank you, all of our parents and caregivers, for being with us here today. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much, Trustee Mamalidi. I would like now to welcome our new Director of Education, Director Colleen Russell-Rollins, to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Zena. It's wonderful to see you, and thank you very much for your tireless service on TDSB's Mental Health and Wellbeing Committee. Good morning, parents, caregivers, trustees, students, and staff and guests. I've thought of parents and caregivers so many times over the past year and a half. So I want to begin by acknowledging the extraordinarily challenging year and a half you've endured. You have preserved through the health pandemic, financial pressures, working from home or going to work each day, and the challenges of taking care of your children's learning and well-being while being apart from teachers, family, and friends, your support system. The many impacts of the pandemic may be felt for years to come. It's forced us to confront some of the inequities that have always existed and uncovered new inequities that both educators and the broader community need to urgently address. Our focus on Indigenous education, equity, and anti-racism has never been more important. And yet, despite these obstacles, you've kept going. As Director of Education, I've been moved by the resilience of the students, staff, and families I've met. Let me say, you deserve immense recognition, and you have my sincere appreciation. While the pandemic has continued to influence our daily lives, I want to assure you we are making progress. Learning continues online and in person. We're committed to implementing the recommendations provided by the government and Toronto Public Health by layering health and safety protections. I want to assure you that we're doing everything we can this year to minimize disruption to learning and maintaining consistency and routines while safely and gradually returning some of the activities we know students enjoy the most: trips, clubs, sports, and other school-based activities. We're also mindful of the role that you play as parents and caregivers in helping to keep our schools and communities safe and healthy. I cannot emphasize enough how much we value our partnership with parents and caregivers, because you know your child in ways that as educators, we simply do not. We're striving to ensure that your voice matters to your child's teacher in school, on school councils, and PIAC. I'm so pleased that so many of you are here today with the goal of engaging with each other and learning strategies to better support your child's success in school and beyond. Brighter days are ahead. Every crisis or challenge has the opportunity to make us better. And I'm committed to having us as a district emerge stronger from the pandemic. There are at least 3 silver linings or lessons that are important for us to remember as we think about emerging from the pandemic. The first silver lining of the pandemic is that more parents and caregivers have had insights into teaching practice and student learning than they would have if the pandemic had not upended our lives. It is my belief that this new knowledge should give you more confidence as you support your child and collaborate with educators at your local school. I hope it's brought us closer to having authentic and informed conversations about improving your child's educational experience. The second lesson is the value of remote meetings. I know you're going to say, Colleen, I'm tired of remote meetings, and I am too. But from the beginning of the pandemic, more families have been able to connect with each other and with educators through remote technologies such as the one we're using today. Let's not forget how to use these technologies when we return to more normal circumstances and in-person gatherings are possible again. These technologies have provided greater equity of access to learning opportunities and opportunities to connect for some parents and caregivers who otherwise would not be able to be part of a community and to engage in these important conversations. The last lesson is the focus of the keynote today. The health pandemic has shone an intense light on the importance of mental health and well-being. A recent report by UNICEF says sound mental health is every bit as important as physical health for achieving developmental milestones in childhood. It goes on to say, on the contrary, diminished mental health during childhood can severely impact the way children learn, act, and handle their emotions. I don't know about you, but I know this to be true firsthand. I believe that actively investing in our own and our children's mental health and well-being is essential in order to thrive in an ever-changing world, not simply to focus on surviving each day. As director, I want all students to thrive in our schools, academically, emotionally, and personally, regardless of their identity. And I know you want this too, as parents and caregivers. Let's strive to be good partners in this important endeavor. Thank you for generously giving of your time to be in community with other parents, partners, and staff at the conference today. My sincere gratitude goes to the organizers of the conference for your tremendous and tireless effort. Thank you for the opportunity to address you briefly this morning, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much, Director Russell Rollins. Thank you for your leadership and continued support throughout this pandemic. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all enjoying the weekend, and I'm happy that you can join us this morning. I am Evan Wu, a student trustee with the Toronto District School Board and a grade 12 student at Earl Haig Secondary School. It is my utmost pleasure and honor today to welcome our keynote speaker, Cherry Rose Tan. Cherry Rose has 12 years of expertise in psychology and has guided thousands through mental health challenges. Her mission this decade is to make mental health measurable, actionable, and relatable. Teaching at the Schulich School of Business, she's a 5th-generation entrepreneur, and her superpower is helping leaders talk about the really hard things so that they can lead powerfully at home and at work. And as a mental health authority, she has been featured in Forbes and more. Everyone, we're in for a real treat today. Please help me welcome the one and only Cherry Rose Tan.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, Evan. So, when I was 14, I had a very interesting experience. I was sitting there in my shared bedroom with my brother, and we made a promise. Where this story starts today and the dialogue that we're going to have together with mental health starts in the stories that I've experienced as a mental health survivor. See, when I was younger, I was a Filipino Chinese Canadian, a first generation immigrant. My early days of being here in Toronto, Canada, were steeped in the immigration experience of dreams and hopes that my parents have of moving us to Canada for a better life. Growing up and being from Manila, Philippines, many of the experiences that I experienced myself, along with my parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents, were steeped in things such as poverty, war, and violence. And we came here to Canada for a better life. But even though we had these dreams and these aspirations, what really struck me at the time was the struggle. I remember being a young child, watching my parents work tirelessly to provide for us and to make sure that we could afford our education. I would watch my parents trying to make ends meet and my dad working 3 jobs a week in order to put a roof on our heads. And despite all of this struggle of being Filipino Chinese Canadians, coming here to Canada with nothing but hopes and dreams, coming here to Canada to setting those roots for our entire family, there was one thing that kept us alive in strength and in hope. And it was stories. It was real and human stories of generations past, of other family members who had experienced high highs in their family, but also the low lows. And these stories were the stories of my grandparents and my great-grandparents. See, something that is really quirky about my family is I come from a family of many, many, many entrepreneurs, 5 generations of entrepreneurs, in fact. The first business that started in my family was actually my great-great-grandfather, who tried to build a bakery that failed, but went on to create other kinds of businesses, trying again and again to be an entrepreneur. And it was so inspiring for me being in these stories, sitting down with my brother and my parents at the table, and my mom and dad telling us these stories of how great-great-grandfather would create business after business, not letting him stop, and using entrepreneurship to build a better life and to really break that cycle of poverty. And at the same time, even though there were these glorious stories about building companies, my parents didn't shy away from talking about the darkness and the struggles that also came with entrepreneurship. I remember hearing stories about both of my grandmothers who now run businesses, but how in their earlier days, they were survivors of war, having experienced homelessness, especially as young women. And so steeped with these experiences of my family, of the strengths and the struggles, I was there at 14, sitting in that shared bedroom with my brother, and we held out our pinkies, a pinky promise. And the promise that we made together was a lifelong promise that we were going to commit our lives to becoming entrepreneurs as well, in order to break the cycle of poverty for my family and to create a better life for generations to come. And so my brother Kian and I set out to do this. And we were persistent. And, in that persistence, we tried all kinds of things in all kinds of industries, some that were successful, but also a lot of epic failures at the same time. One of my earliest businesses was actually a tutoring company, teaching math and English at the time. For my brother, his first business was actually a band management company. He was so passionate about beatboxing and rappers and being very much in the scene here in Toronto, and was helping local bands book gigs all across Ontario. And over the course of those years together that we became sibling entrepreneurs, we tried time and time again to create a business that could really break that cycle. And it landed us into a really important time, which was 2013. And so I'm going to be sharing with you right now a really important picture that talks about this time. So this picture that you see here was a life-changing trip that changed the course of our lives for me and Kian. See, at the time, my brother Kian had just graduated from university. And one of the things that we were obsessed about was this idea of financial inclusion. As we were building companies over time and time again, the one theme that came up for us was this realization that the system wasn't equal. And that for my background, coming as a Filipino Chinese, having experienced across my family intergenerational trauma and intergenerational poverty, that so many people out there in the world didn't have access to the same opportunities that many others in Canada are really privileged to have. And in that financial inclusion, we were excited and committed to helping the unbanked. The word unbanked is a popular word in the finance and tech industry, the fintech industry, which calls for and acknowledges the fact that there are millions, and in fact, billions of people out there on the planet who are hardworking and driven and have the same dreams and aspirations as my family, but don't have access to banks. They don't have bank accounts, and they don't have a way of participating in the wider financial economy. And so my brother and I set out to build a company to solve this problem. And so here we are in 2013, where my brother traveled to Cape Town, South Africa. And we were drawn to this place because we were trying to look at other financial models, other communities that were going through the same struggles, and seeing how community could come together to really empower the next generation. And so my brother, being there in Cape Town in particular, he stayed there for 4 weeks. And so these pictures that you're seeing here are actually real pictures from his trip, actually from his camera. And in staying there for 4 weeks, he was really touched, and there was a life-changing experience that birthed the company and the legacy that my brother and I now share. So this life-changing experience, I remember when he had arrived home from his trip, and on that night, he had called me so excited. And it was midnight, it was pretty late at night, and he was so excited to call me. And he called me on the phone and he said, Achi, Achi. And the word Achi means bigger sister in my culture. And he called me up, and Kian was saying, Achi, Achi, I need to tell you something. I just had a life-changing experience, and I saw something that taught me what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life. I figured it out. And this is the story. So when he was staying here at this village in Cape Town, he met an elderly woman, and she was 70 years old, and somebody who called the respect of all of the villages around her. She was considered to be an idol because she was showing people what was possible. What was interesting about her and touched my brother so deeply is that she was an entrepreneur. She had been an entrepreneur for over 40 years, but she wasn't like the entrepreneurs that we think about in North American media. Oftentimes when we're turning on the news, the definition of being an entrepreneur is in a very particular way. We think about, the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world or the Elon Musk of the world who are building out these unicorn or AKA billion-dollar businesses, often these big high-tech businesses. But there are so many other entrepreneurs out there, entrepreneurs like her, who have gifts, natural gifts that can turn into a business. And she became an entrepreneur because she wanted to provide for her family. And so for 40 years, her gift was weaving baskets by hand. She would weave these beautiful, intricate baskets and would be selling these baskets all across the region that she was living in. And she became well known for this art. And people would transfer and give that money back to her through this idea of mobile transfers, using cell phones to transfer money back to her so that she could be rewarded for her work. And in seeing the way that the village came together and using this infrastructure of cell phones to participate in the financial economy, we were inspired. For ourselves, for the Filipinos back home, many of our people are unbanked. And so Kian and I and another co-founding family, another brother-sister duo, set out to build a financial app using blockchain and crypto that was on a mobile cell phone. And this mobile app allowed people to transfer money between North America and Asia. And so you can imagine that, especially back then, thinking about 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, that being in crypto in those early years was really tough. You know, we would be talking about blockchain and crypto and this idea of financial inclusion. And these terms at the time weren't really talked about in the industry. And a lot of people, you know, thought that we were crazy and were wondering what it is that we were building. But we persisted in this mission. And so in 2017, after all this grueling hard work, we had our big break. Our big break, the two co-founding families coming together, where in the end of 2017, early 2018, our company signed a 9-figure deal between our company and the Toronto Stock Exchange, setting our company on a very different path. And why am I sharing this with you? Well, here's the thing. While we were going through the highs of entrepreneurship, what I couldn't talk about at the time was I couldn't talk about the low lows that my family was experiencing, juxtaposed with our successes as a business. Very unfortunately and very suddenly at that time, my brother, who was the co-founder and COO of our company, a person that I deeply trusted, who I'd been building companies for 12 years, suddenly had an unexpected and very tragic accident. On Christmas of 2017, my brother Kian had unfortunately and suddenly without warning passed away in his sleep. And so going into 2018, with these successes that we had as a company, our dreams finally coming true around financial inclusion, I was confronted with these conversations of mental health, of what was I going to do now? Hello, my name is Cherry Rose Tan, and I am so honored to be here today at this conference for parents and caregivers as partners. I am the founder and CEO of #RealTalk, the mental health movement for the tech industry. #RealTalk is North America's largest platform for founder mental health. And the word founder is another way to say tech entrepreneur, meaning that I have spent many years sitting down with every kind of entrepreneur, from the early entrepreneur who's got an idea, all the way to an entrepreneur who's been in the industry for 30 or 40 years. And in the last 4 years, since my brother's passing, I have made it my mission to bring the conversations of mental health, to bring the realness and the messiness of the human experience to these places like the tech industry, so that we can really support each other and move forward as a community. And since in that time, we've worked with over 40,000 founders. And so I'm excited to be here with you today for 2 reasons. One, like many of you here, I have lived experience through mental health, being a survivor. And second, I'm honored to be here to share with you the great many experiences that I've had with mental health conversations and being a mental health expert to really help you and support you, first of all, as caregivers and as parents, because we need to take care of each other first. Also empowering you to talk about mental health to your children and your loved ones. And finally, inviting the greater community to be part of a collective team so that we can all move forward together during the pandemic. So something that's interesting that maybe people don't know about me, as people are reading about #RealTalk, is that I actually started off my career as an award-winning special education teacher. So it feels very sentimental being here today. I've taught every grade from SK to grade 8, sitting with many youth over the course of time, students who've struggled with depression, anxiety, ADHD, learning disabilities, and trauma. And now, in the work that I've been doing with #RealTalk, I also currently hold the appointment of entrepreneur in residence at the Schulich School of Business, where I have the privilege each and every day to be working with youth from ages 18 to 22 who are now embarking on entrepreneurship for the first time. And so as we have this conversation together, this keynote together, I want you to think of it as a dialogue from me to you and from you to me. And to also know that after this keynote, we will have a portion of the time where we'll be doing Q&A and to get more intimate with each other. So let's begin. Okay, so the first part you might be wondering about is what exactly is hashtag real talk, or just real talk in general. So as I said, a lot of the work that I've been doing this last 4 years has been about bringing and creating space for us to talk about mental health, or what I like to call the unspoken conversation. As you might have heard, especially in many of the opening remarks, especially from, for example, Colleen, the Director of Education here at the TDSB, I know that there are many of you who have experienced also the high highs and the low lows. And it can feel like, even though we're going through those intense emotions, that we often don't speak about it, this idea of the unspoken conversation. And as I mentioned, with hashtag real talk, we have worked with over 40,000 leaders over the course of 4 years. And so I think I have a bit of an inside scoop in terms of what those conversations are like. And also to acknowledge that these conversations are made possible because there are other people in the community, other tech founders and investors and colleagues that I've trusted in my own industry who've also come forward as survivors of mental health and who have said, hey, you know what, Cherry Rose, I'm also going to share my mental health story because this is an important topic to talk about. And so because of these conversations that are being had, I want to show you some of the possibilities. These articles that you see here are all articles about the tech industry, of what can be done as we start being real with each other and the kinds of conversations that we can have together as a community. Now, you might be wondering why is Cherry Rose coming here today to talk about mental health, especially in light of an education context, especially in light of the kids and maybe even the parents that you might be taking care of. Well, something that you might not know is that entrepreneurs are actually experiencing also a lot of mental health struggles themselves. There's this big myth, when we avoid hashtag real talk, that many people think that entrepreneurs are invincible. And in fact, that is often not the case. In an iconic study that I want to share with you here, there is a psychologist whose name is Dr. Michael Freeman, and he is from the University of Southern California, an expert in this space. And he spent several years traveling all across North America to interview thousands and thousands of tech entrepreneurs and founders. And here's what he found as he was talking to them about mental health. And you might be surprised. First of all, entrepreneurs, 72% of them have experienced mental illness at one point in their life. 30% have experienced depression. 27% have experienced anxiety. And because of the stressors that they feel, this feeling that they have to be on and performing all the time, not just in their professional life, but in their personal life, they are also more prone to things such as bipolar disorder, substance use, and suicidal thoughts. And so I want to acknowledge with you today that, entrepreneurship, like caregiving, can feel like an all-in sport, an all-in activity that, especially during COVID-19, I know that for many of you, it can feel intense, emotional, and deeply personal. And so as we go deeper into this conversation, to the space that I want to create with you today, I want you to lean in and to allow yourself to also experience real talk and to think about the things that you need for yourself as a caregiver. And so let's start. The 3 areas that we're going to talk about today is going to come in these 3 layers. First, hashtag real talk with me. Are you being real with yourself about what you need as a parent or a caregiver? Second, real talk with you. What does it mean to be a parent or a caregiver? And to start that conversation about emotions or about mental health with our child. And third, real talk with us. What does that mean to invite all of the other people that are also part of our child's success? Everything from our family members to our friends to teachers and more. And so let's go deeper as we talk about this. Okay, so the first part we're going to talk about is real talk with me. Now, when I was going through what I was going through in late 2017, early 2018, I want to be real with all of you. It was the hardest thing that I had to go through in my life. And I'm saying this as also a mental health expert. You know, I have an undergrad and master's degree in psych. I was a special education teacher for many years. And despite all of that training I had, you know, when I came into 2018, I was human, just like everybody else. And I had my struggles. And this was the question that I asked myself: what will I do? What I was facing at the time in those first 4 months was so intense. I was going through this idea of, you know, having to grieve over my brother and really grappling with the implications of now being an only child for the second half of my life. At the same time, my brother and I had this company with investors and many, many employees who were depending on us for their livelihoods. And then, to make matters worse, 10 days after my brother's passing, my mother got diagnosed with stage 3C cancer. And so I became a caregiver to her as we spent the next 6 months going through treatment after treatment, double surgery, 6 chemotherapy sessions, and over 30 sessions of radiation to try and to combat the cancer that we had now caught. And so I was really grappling with this. I was really having this feeling like I was looking in the mirror and having a real talk conversation with myself. This picture that you see here really represents how I was feeling at the time. For maybe some people here might recognize this view and some people might not. This picture that you see here is the window actually of Sunnybrook Hospital at the Odette Cancer Center where my mother was being treated. And I remember sitting there beside her and us having intense conversations about grief and just about her journey with cancer. And as I was watching her, you know, undergoing chemo, something came over me. And I remember one time, it was a really rainy afternoon, and I was sitting across the window as my mom was sleeping. And I thought to myself, wow, Cherry Rose, this is really, really intense. There is a lot on your shoulders right now. You're trying to grieve. You're trying to hold together the company that you and your brother shared, this legacy that you shared together, and you're trying to be strong for your parents. But where is that space for you? Where is that self-care for you? And the reality is, as I sat with that, was that I wasn't really doing a lot of self-care for myself. And so, you know, you might be surprised to learn that, for example, when I speak to many entrepreneurs who are running entire companies, who are managing employees, expectations from employees and investors and even their own family, they also deal with the messiness of being human. All of these topics that you see here on this slide, these are all real conversations that we've had in the Real Talk community of founders and investors who have told us that they've experienced these situations, these life events while building their company. And I share this with you because I want to acknowledge that maybe for yourself as a caregiver, so much of your life has focused on, you know, maybe not running an entire company, but you are running an entire household or running an entire family. And that it doesn't mean that the messiness of our human experience isn't there as well. And so what did I do as I, you know, encountered that real talk for myself? Well, first of all, I realized that this wasn't sustainable. When August came along and it was my first birthday without my brother, all I could feel was the waves of grief, and it was intense. And I knew that I needed to take self-care or else I would burn out. And so, I had that conversation with my parents. I had that conversation with my partner and all of my employees, that I kind of had to tell them, hey, you know what? I need to be real with all of you. Like, I'm not really doing so well, and I actually need to take time off to be able to grieve. And I did that. And this is where I went up north by myself, no technology, no nothing. And I took that weekend on that day of my birthday just to be able to process what was going on. And so the strategies of the theme I want to share with you today, as we're talking about real talk with me, this picture sort of the Care Bear is, how can you care for yourself? Okay. So what I want to talk about here with Real Talk with Me is acknowledging for ourselves as parents, as caregivers, as leaders, that we cannot pour from an empty cup. And I would really like to invite, for those of you watching right now, to actually drop in the chat of, would love to know, how is your self-care doing right now? And I'm going to actually stop the screen share to be able to read out some of the comments, and to also say that, as we're talking about self-care, if you're feeling like it's a really tender moment right now, that you could also, maybe write down some of your thoughts on a piece of paper, or just keep that thought to yourself as we're engaging this conversation. But I would love to know in the chat, how is your self-care doing right now as a parent or as a caregiver during this time? And so, looking at the chat right now, I'm seeing some people talking about, practicing empathy, practicing self-compassion, and some of the themes that are going on there. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so, and also, yes, I see another one about being in nature as well. Okay, so to talk about some strategies that we could use as parents and caregivers to talk about self-care, there are 3 ones that I really want to emphasize to you. The first one is compassion. The idea of compassion, and I know this can be hard for many of us, is that it's important to be kind to ourselves. I think as parents and as caregivers, a lot of the time, we feel like we have to be perfect and we have to show up in the highest or in the best way possible. But the fact is that COVID-19 is a really tough time. And so I really invite you that rather than judging your emotions, maybe like sadness and anger, just to offer yourself the space around compassion. And the words that we often use, especially the Real Talk community, is we talk about this idea of the double struggle, that when we're judging the way that we feel, what starts to come up for us is guilt or shame, and that amplifies our pain and adds to that level of struggle. The second strategy to share with you is this idea of release. And you know what, when we're going through emotions, sometimes it can feel tough to allow ourselves to experience it. So are there other tools that you can use? Things like music, journaling, or movies, outside tools to help you move through uncomfortable emotions. A really great story, one that touched me so, so deeply, was a woman that I met, and her name is Angela Lee. And she is a professor and the dean of practice at the Columbia Business School. And she runs a very well-known angel investor network called 37 Angels out of New York. And I remember sitting with her in the early days of #RealTalk, where she was kind enough to donate her story around depression with us. And in her sharing of her story, she talked about how for so many years, especially as an adult, she had a really hard time allowing herself to feel. And so when she feels sad, she actually has a list of like the saddest movies out there. And she'll pull out one of those movies and will watch that movie in order to help herself cry. That's one way that she chooses to release. The last example to share is this idea of space. When we're being caregivers or being parents, I know that you're all in when it comes to taking care of your child. But are you all in when it comes to taking care of yourself and your own self-care? And so as you're embarking on this journey and, taking care of your child, do you create space for yourself to be that way with yourself and your mental health? And so in those themes that are around there, in being real with yourself and checking in with your cup, is your cup half empty right now? Is your cup completely empty? Or is your cup full as you're thinking about this journey? So the next part I want to talk about is real talk with you. And how do we actually have these conversations with the people that we love the most, especially our children? And here's the question that comes up for so many people as they're experiencing perhaps uncomfortable or intense emotions and even mental health. And it's the question, who can I talk to? And to really acknowledge, I've met so many people from all walks of life through my work with #RealTalk. And something that I've learned is that individuals of all ages and all backgrounds can experience mental health struggles, and to also know that you're not alone. And our kids in particular, if they are struggling with, for example, intense emotions or mental health, maybe they're thinking about this question, who can I talk to about what I'm feeling? And so I'm taking you to this next part of the story, which is 1 year after my brother's passing. At the time, I was now having this space around my self-care, but there was something else coming up for me. And what I was sitting with was the implications of now trying to figure out the second half of my life. How was I going to move forward in my grief? Because grief is not like a one-time thing. It's a thing that ebbs and flows through the course of your life. And I felt a lot like this picture here, which was a picture that I took in that first year of grief, where I would take walks around the neighborhood that my brother and I grew up in. And one day I encountered this snail. And I took this picture and I was thinking to myself, I really feel like this snail right now. I feel like I'm just shelling myself in. I feel like I don't really want people to see that I'm a mess right now, and I'm crying and I'm grieving and I'm angry sometimes and I'm grateful other days. And grief was just so confusing. And so in that experience, I had a theory. And the theory that came up for me was this: are there other people in my community who have also been through what I've been through? Maybe not grief or losing an only sibling, but who've gone through their mental health struggles themselves. Are there other tech founders and investors who've been through those mental health struggles, or am I alone in my experience? And so I went out there and I reached out to 50 different CEOs and investors. And I told them, and I was very blunt with them, and I said, hey, my name is Cherry Rose, and I'm a tech founder here in Toronto. I just lost my only sibling, and we were building this big national crypto company. And I'm reaching out to you because I'm struggling with my mental health, and I just need to talk to someone. Would you be willing to have a conversation with me? And so I spent that first year sitting down in office after office all across the GTA, sitting in front of these people. And we would talk about what it was like for them to be a founder, what it was like for them to be an investor. And boy, let me tell you, I was shocked. And at the same time, I was also touched. At the time, I was thinking to myself that there weren't that many people that I could share to, or people that understood. And I was proven wrong. Out of all of those conversations I had, those 50 conversations with CEOs, almost every single person that I sat with had a very direct and intimate experience with either mental health or some kind of loss. And even more so, what was shocking to me is when I asked them, hey, when you look back at your journey as a CEO, as a business leader, and the reasons why you failed, what do you think was the reason? 35 out of the 50 people that I talked to said that the number one reason was avoidance, that they weren't having conversations like the picture that you see here about their struggles. And they waited until it was too late to ask for help from their investors, from their advisors, from their co-founders, and more. And so this inspired a lot of the conversations that became the backbone of #RealTalk, where we went back to all of the CEOs and asked them, hey, you know what? What you just shared with me, I had like 10 other conversations like this. And I don't want other people, other generations of entrepreneurs to feel like they're alone. I am asking you, from one trusted colleague to another, would you be willing to donate your mental health story for me? I will treat it with the utmost trust and integrity. And so that's what happened. Real Talk with You started to spread, and we started collecting all of these one-on-one stories of what mental health could look like for founders. Everything from Angela Lee, who I mentioned earlier, talking about her experience dealing with depression, Stephen Pulver, who runs one of the most exclusive and popular tech conferences in Canada, talking about his lifelong journey with anxiety. We had Vicki Saunders, who is very well known in the women's CEO community, running a company called SheEO. And she talked about how in the first year of building this global network, she had actually lost her mom and was dealing with the grief of that. Or people like Dan Martell, a 3-time exited founder who runs one of the biggest companies in the software as a service industry, who talked about his journey with substance use and rehab and how rehab in particular made him a better founder and a better dad. And so, as we're talking about Real Talk with You, I know many of you may be wondering, and especially for your kids and your loved ones, mental health can feel tough to talk about. How can I start this conversation? And so there are 3 ways that I would love to share with you that I've seen and have worked across different ages. So the first one to talk about is what I'd like to call acknowledgement. In my previous experience as a mental health educator, I spent a lot of time actually teaching younger students. And sometimes, younger kids might feel a little bit shy or might feel a lot of emotions. And it helps to actually just invite them to describe how they are feeling. To give you an example of this, one way to talk about it is to say something like, hey, I know things can feel really tough right now, but I want to be that person that you can talk to. How are you really feeling? Inviting your child to describe at least the emotions so they can start exploring it rather than avoiding or hiding away the experiences that they're feeling. When it comes to those of you, parents or caregivers who are dealing maybe with teenage children, you might be thinking instead of permission. A lot of times when it comes to teenagers in particular, they want to feel like they have a voice at the table and they want to feel like they're empowered. And so one tool that we often use, even in the Real Talk community, is asking for permission to talk about something so that they can voice out what they need to create that space. An example of this here is actually just being forthright and saying, hey, can we have a chat about blank? I want to understand. I want to know where you're coming from. And allowing them to say in turn what it is they might need to have that conversation with you. And the last one, and I think this one is my favorite, is this idea of support. So many of the times in my career as a teacher and as a founder, I noticed that many people shy away from having the mental health conversation because they are scared that they don't have the answers. And something that I want to let you know is that having the mental health conversation doesn't mean having to know every single thing. It doesn't mean having to fix or to solve. It can also just be a listening and compassionate ear. So for example, an idea of showing support and showing love to your own child could be saying something like, I love you and I want to be a better parent for you. How can I support you? What do you need from me? And so these are the 3 ways to engage in this mental health conversation with your child or perhaps your loved one. And so I want to pause here for a second to invite people to actually drop in the chat between acknowledgement, permission, and support. Which of these 3 are you being drawn to perhaps try in your own household with your child or with your loved ones? I would really love to know. And so I'm going to stop screen share for a second to be able to see the chat. Okay, so I'm already starting to see a few things in the chat. We have Dee Williams, who's talking about support. Omar as well, who's really drawn to support. Jessica as well mentioning support with her 11-year-old daughter. Thank you for sharing as well, Jessica. You know, Amir also talking about support. So it seems like there's really a commonality right now, especially with some of the shares being drawn to support. And so, you know, and Jocelyn is also support, amazing. Okay, so really great to see a lot of these different things that have come up in the chat. And to see all the different ways that you're supporting yourself and, you know, yourself and that conversation that you're having with your child or your loved ones. Okay, so the last piece that we're going to talk about, and this one has to be my favorite because the potential of what it could do for ourselves, for our children, and for a broader community is #RealTalkWithUs. You know, when we start having one-on-one conversations with the people that we love, you know, maybe starting with your child and talking to them about mental health or just even about emotions, what starts to happen is it starts to transform the people who know us. You know, in being real with ourselves and others, what starts to happen is we create a community that can be there for one another. And the question starts to become, where do we go from here? So a book that really emphasizes the mindset behind this is a book called Seth Godin, and it's called What to Do When It's Your Turn, and It's Always Your Turn. Seth Godin is known as the king of marketing. And in this book, he talks about the fact, you know, in studying a lot of leadership success stories, that being a leader, you know, is not about being perfect. Being a leader and really impacting our households and our communities for the better is just about the willingness to take our turn. It's about the willingness to step forward and to try. And so to share with you what it's been like since for us, you know, when I first started, especially after the loss of my brother Kiad, it started with one conversation. A tech CEO who sat with me after 8 months and he said, you know what, Cherry Rose, I'd like to be the first person who donates my mental health story for you, to you. And once we got that one yes, you know, that one yes became 10 yeses from the community, and then became 30 yeses, then 50, and now the 70 mental health stories that we have across North America. And the thing about community and what's so beautiful about #RealTalk is that it starts to multiply. It becomes an energy, a space, a way to connect with other people, a shared language around mental health. And so what our community looks like since then is it looks like, you know, these peer-to-peer groups being with other entrepreneurs, very intimate. It could look like panels where we're bringing together all kinds of experts to talk about mental health. And it can also look like these keynotes, like the way that I am with you today, where I'm speaking to an audience and really inviting people into that conversation. And so, you know, in entrepreneurship, we have a saying that I'd like to give to you. And the saying that we say is that no one gets there alone. I wouldn't be here today being the founder and CEO of this movement, being the executive, being the entrepreneur in residence at the Schulich School of Business, without the hundreds of people who engaged in Real Talk with me. We have founders and investors, but we also have nonprofits, governments, and schools. We have researchers, practitioners, therapists, psychologists, people who really backed our movement, and even media and my own family who helped me through these tough times. And so the last thing that I really want to share with you, as we're thinking about Real Talk together as a community, is that, Real Talk and this idea of starting Real Talk with me, then Real Talk with you, then Real Talk with us, is that it comes full circle. I am so, so proud to be here with you today and so honored, because when I first started in my career, I started with a deep, deep love for education and really wanting to hold space for other students who are struggling with trauma and mental illness. And I started with, as I said, SK to grade 8 at one point. And then it took me on this incredible journey that I shared with my brother, 12 years of entrepreneurship, where we built, an international company that exists until this day, working on financial inclusion on 3 different continents. And now with that combined experience of being a mental health survivor, it's taken me full circle, where now I work at the Schulich School of Business as an entrepreneur in residence, working with 150 startups, thousands of students who are also struggling and also figuring out their way through COVID-19 and this pandemic. And I sit there with the next generation of youth who are now wanting to have these conversations in the community and impacting and making a way for us to connect and trust each other. And so it's such an honor to be here with you today, for us to come full circle, and for me to be able to support you as parents and caregivers on your journey as you're supporting your kids. And so in light of the spirit, the 3 things I want to talk about here in terms of Real Talk and transforming our community is, first of all, family, right? That when it comes to your own community, having those conversations in your household doesn't have to be perfect. It could just be about being human and really asking each and every person in the household, how can we create something that allows each and every one of us to show up as our best selves? The other piece that I think is so, so important, and I know there are people here right now, especially from the Toronto District School Board, such as teachers and other practitioners, social workers, etc., is how can we create a really positive relationship, a team that can actually help and support our child. And this is all about creating an honest and respectful relationship. How can we be allies rather than adversaries as we're going through hardship? How can we talk about what we need so that we can make sure we have a shared language and move forward in those struggles that we may be encountering during COVID-19? And lastly, and not least, it is so important to also think about friends. I know, especially for many caregivers here, and entrepreneurs are very guilty of this, that we can often feel like we're lone wolves, feeling like we have to do everything ourselves. But I want to acknowledge that there are probably friends out there in your circle who want to be there for you. And so how can you be real with them and invite them and give them a chance to be able to support you like the way that you've supported them? And so in this next part of our conversation together is I want to practice, hashtag real talk with us live right now, and to really hold this safe space for all of the parents and caregivers and other people in the audience here to talk about mental health. And so what's going to happen is, I know that we currently have the chat open up, and we also have a moderation team. And I would like to just open up this conversation for a Q&A for people to have their questions answered about mental health. It could be the personal realm or professional realm. And as we're having this dialogue, especially with this Q&A, I would love people to reflect on, some of the connections that are happening and thinking about what is the one action that you can implement today. And so I'm going to stop my screen share, and I'm also going to invite the moderation team up for us to have this discussion together and for us to be real talk with us.
Thank you so much, Jerry Rose. What a remarkable keynote. I'm inspired and empowered by your words. Thank you so much for your work in mental health and efforts to end its stigma to create a healthy, sustainable life. I see a few questions, so let us begin. For parents who are the CEOs of their homes, managing it all every day, you talked about self-care first. How does that happen when we are so busy just trying to keep our children and lives moving?
That's a really great question. I think what I would say, how do I describe it? I know for entrepreneurs and caregivers that we understand that self-care is really important, but sometimes it feels like a luxury, like we don't have that space. And I think the most important thing that I could say, especially for those who might be feeling the caregiver burnout, which is a very real thing, is to start off with something small, right? Like if self-care feels intimidating. And the one thing I say, especially often to clients and founders that I work with, is to actually start off with what I call the non-negotiables, right? So if we were to start with one action, one thing that you could do to help your self-care, what would that non-negotiable thing be? The one thing that you for sure need in order to maintain at least a certain level of self-care. And the example that I can give, just from my own experience is, in the first 4 months, after losing my brother, I had shared with you in hashtag real talk with me. When I was sitting with myself and self-care felt like a luxury at the time, and I was struggling to just even practice any kind of self-care, the non-negotiable that I realized I came up with was actually sleep, right? Like if I didn't get at least like 8 hours of sleep, my level of health would just like plummet and compromise. And so I actually spent those first, I would say 3 months just focusing on, okay, like my life might be a mess and I might not know what I'm doing in terms of like the company right now, and I'm grieving and I'm figuring out how to manage stuff with my mom's cancer. But could I at least give myself that 8 hours of sleep? Could I at least start with that? And once I started building that foundation momentum, it really gave me the confidence to start going next to the second non-negotiable, and then the third non-negotiable, until I started building that muscle for self-care. So thank you so much for asking the question, and I hope in sharing that experience with you, I hope that helps.
Thank you. I'm just looking at our questions and moving on for you. Bear with me one moment here. Sorry about that. A lot of great questions. I just need.
Yeah, I'm so loving the questions that are coming in.
I apologize. I should be a pro. One second here. Here we go. In regards to mental illness, which can get in the way of having real talk, what can we do to address the stigma that does actually surround us, that cloud? How do we sort of move that away a little?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So I could speak from experience, and I think the way I'll speak about it is actually from the place of being a teacher. In my past life, right? So I was a special education teacher, and I have had thousands of conversations with students of mine who, sometimes felt more comfortable sharing with me first about their mental health experience rather than their parents or caregivers. And I think a part of that experience was they felt shy or self-conscious, or they felt like they didn't want to worry their parents and whatnot. And I think one thing that kind of helped breaking through some of the self-judgment that they were carrying is actually having stories ready, or even statistics or articles ready to show them that they're not alone in that experience. Right. So for example, for myself, like when I was talking with my students, as a special education teacher about mental health, I would often share with them the stats from, the Canadian Mental Health Association, who actually just released a benchmark report on the state of mental health across Canada. This was just released in March, actually, and they had some really incredible stats that allow you to normalize mental health, where they were saying things like, 50% of people right now across Canada registered that they're actually extremely lonely. 60% of people feel right now that coming out of COVID-19, that they're going to experience mental health struggles. And so by having those articles and sort of outside things to be able to share, that it starts to focus that conversation away from them, rather than them thinking, oh, it's me who's got the problem, or it's me who's, there's something wrong with me. Now it starts to shift away, and the conversation becomes a focus on, oh, wow, other people have been through this too. So what can I learn from this experience, or how can we have this conversation together? Yeah, great question. Thank you for asking.
Thank you. These are wonderful and inspired, actually, to be able to take this information with me too. I'm sure all caregivers online are I'm thinking the same. Another question, just going back a bit to the idea of taking that time and permission to get space. As parents, we feel a little guilty sometimes to get that oxygen we need and wondering, how do I give myself permission to take care of myself?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So what comes up for me when I hear that is really reminding ourselves that this is a marathon and not a sprint. Like when I think about my own experiences, even with mental health and being a mental health survivor, and I'm sure a lot of the entrepreneurs I've worked with can relate. We often feel the pressures of having to be on all the time and having to almost even sacrifice ourselves in order to make, let's say, the household work or to make the company work. And actually in the Real Talk community and in the tech community in particular, this has actually been studied about, and we call it sort of like being a martyr, or this idea of like being a martyr leader, right? Where we're compromising our mental health or physical health in order to do that. And so in terms of giving yourself permission, one of the things I have to remind myself of is that, hey, you know what? If I am the leader of this household, right? Or if I am the leader of this company and people are depending on me, that's a long-term journey. People are going to still be depending on you 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And you want to make sure that you're still there, right? Like 10 years from now, still as strong as you were ever. And the thing is, as parents, when we're thinking even about the conversation of mental health, we have to lead her first. And so, giving ourselves permission is two ways. It's one, realizing that, hey, if we want to show up the best way we can as parents or caregivers, we have to take care of ourselves first, or else we're going to burn out and we're not going to show up in the best way possible. And second, and I think this is actually the most important, is also being a role model for our children, right? So if we're not taking time for self-care, and that's what our children are seeing, then how can they give themselves permission to be able to lean into mental health or emotional health? So thank you so much for asking that question.
Thank you. I'm trying to sponge this all in. I might have to reconnect afterwards. A question for you. How can we ensure that we are supporting educators and caregivers with more trauma-sensitive tools and body-oriented practices? I feel a lot of people know that this is how they want to be, but need tools to support. What supports are available to them?
And with this question, this was directed towards caregivers. Is this correct?
Yeah, I believe also educators as well.
Okay, great question. I feel like a big part of actually resources is really creating a common language and actually a relationship with all of the people that are involved in the well-being of your child, right? So for example, for myself, right, when I was a special education educator, and for example, maybe teaching a bunch of different students, different children, it wasn't ever done in a silo, right? So for example, when I was teaching my students, they would have, IEPs, right? Individual education plans. So there was a plan that was set in place for their children's success. But at the same time, we would have people like, practitioners. So we're talking about like therapists or psychologists. We would be working with social workers. Sometimes I was working with speech pathologists or occupational therapists. And so, when it comes to trauma sensitive resources, it's important for us to have that common language or that space where you're actually bringing at least all of those different people together to say, hey, you know what, like this is the team that I really trust with my child around their mental and emotional health. And then afterwards, starting a dialogue about the type of resources that are needed. And I share this because when it comes to especially trauma resources, I want to acknowledge that people don't experience mental health equally, right? So for example, in #RealTalk, we actually do a lot of work in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And when I'm speaking, for example, to people of color or people out there who might have had very particular experiences about mental health, especially when we're talking about maybe the Indigenous community or the Black community or the Asian community right now, who've had very intense experiences during COVID-19. Bringing that community together, right? Like that, all those practitioners and that team together first to talk about those needs will then create a space to brainstorm together as a collective, like, hey, what are the resources we currently have? And then what are the resources that are still missing that, that we need to have to speak to that particular child or to speak to that particular community? And so I would say that that's the two sort of levels that start there is, obviously bringing together that team first for a shared conversation and dialogue. And as I said, it doesn't have to be super formal, but it's the intention that counts. And then once we're looking at all of the resources that are currently available, which ones are the most appropriate for that situation? And also which ones can we bring in given the situation that our child or maybe that caregiver is going through?
Throughout the day and even after the conference ends, please ensure that you explore the virtual event platform. You may visit the Mental Health Lounge, Special Education Cafe, or enjoy the number of games and resources we have prepared for you. Please note that the main platform will be access to the agenda and links for all workshops. If for some reason you get locked out, please use the login information provided to you to get back into the platform. If you need assistance, please send a message to the contact provided in your welcome email. I won't see you again today, so we want to thank everyone who has been involved in the success of today's event. To all of the workshop presenters, organizing committee, vendors, and agencies, TDSB staff and trustees, volunteers, all of the participants who came out to make this a successful day, and our platform host, Solomon Productions team. Thank you.
Kayla, I apologize. Can I just hold on just a moment? I'd like to take
sorry.
a moment. Sorry about this. I'd like to take a moment to thank Cherry Rose so much for your keynote today, for your inspiring words, and for the tools and the resources that we can all look to and continue our journey in mental health and supporting our families and our children.
You're very welcome. It was an honor to be here. And, as a possible invitation, I know when we talk about real talk, it's like planting a seed and then that space starts to open up. If people do want to connect or even have a further conversation, you could just find me on LinkedIn, Cherry Rose Tan, and happy to talk further. But wishing everybody here an incredible time at the conference. And thank you for being willing to have #RealTalk with us.
Thanks, Kate. Back to you. Thank you, Kayla. Back to you just to give some quick wrap up notes. So thank you again, Cherry Rose.
Okay, thank you, Zena, and thank you, Cherry Rose. I guess I didn't read the prompts as well as I should have. Again, we wish you all a wonderful day of learning and connection ahead. Also remember that you may stay and explore the platform after the last workshop. Our time has come to start our first workshop, so you can grab yourself a drink and maybe a notepad for your session and then log into your first session for 11:30. I hope you have had an amazing day of learning. I look forward to seeing your thoughts on social media using #TDSBParentConf. Enjoy the rest of your day.
It looks like she still is.